Alright, so now we need to fetch the documents, the links that the user created, and we need to show them over here. So the fetching of documents should happen at the very first time, the first time that they land on this screen. So for this, let's head back to the project and we will be importing the use effect hook. Let's do that. So we used the same thing, this hook, in the app component for the auth state. And I remember that I mistakenly said that this function, the first argument that the use effect takes, this function is called on every re-render. What I meant to say was that it's called on every render, including the first one. And as we just want to limit to the first one, like when the component is first mounted, we pass in an empty array as the second argument. So we will be doing the same thing over here. Let's use the use effect and let's pass in an empty array as the second argument. So as we know that this function cannot be asynchronous, which means in order to use the async await, we can add in a function inside of it. Let's do that. We can name it as fetch links. It's going to be an asynchronous function and we just need to call it right away. So now within this function, we have to make the request to get the documents within the respective path, the exact same path where we are saving them. So I will be copying the same thing. And as you can see that we do need the user UID over here. So instead of copying it 2 more times, we can actually shift it into a variable of its own. So we can name it as user UID. Let's do this. We can use this thing as the doc ID. Let's copy the same thing from here and let's add it to the fetching of links. So this will return back it's going to return back the snapshot, the documents snapshot, but we actually have to add in the get method. So over here we used the add to add the document, and now we will be fetching, we are going to get all the documents within this path, this sub collection. So it's going to return back the snapshot and we kind of have to transform it in order to use it in our application. So let's name it as snapshot instead. And now this snapshot will contain all the documents and we kind of need to loop over this list and we need to get each document. So this thing is not an array. If it was an array, we could have used the map method in order to create the array, but it does not, it's not an array. So we have to use the for each, which is a method available on it. So this for each will be called with each document, but keep it in mind that the argument is not the actual document. It's more of like the document reference, and in order to get the actual data out of it, we have to call the data method on it in such a way. So if we do this thing and if we take a look at the console, we actually need to log it to the console first. Let's wrap it inside console.log. And now if we take a look, as you can see, we have the actual data of the document, which includes all the fields. So that is great. Now, in order to actually use these documents in our application, we need to create an array. Let's do that. So over here within this scope, we will be creating a temporary array called temp links, which will be empty by default. And after looping on each document, we can just push each document to this array in such a way. And now we can log this array to the console. If we do this, we should be getting the same thing within the array. As you can see, as we just created a single document, we have the same thing with all the fields. So that's great. Now the other thing is, along with these fields, we also need to have the ID. And as I said that we will be using the document ID. So for that, instead of pushing the data right away, we will be passing in an object manually, and we are going to spread out the object that we get by calling this method, the return value, the actual data. And now this thing is exactly the same as what we had before. Like in terms of the structure, is going to be the same thing, but by structuring it in such a way, we can add in more properties on top of it to the actual object. So we need to add in the ID, and the ID has to be the document ID, this thing, which lies inside the same document reference. So doc.id. If we do this and if we take a look, this time within the array in the object, there we have the ID property. So that's great. It means that we actually have everything that we need to use this array in our application. So for that, over here, let me just, like, instead of using the dummy data, we can pass in an empty array, and over here we just need to update the state. That's it. So set links, pass in the temp links as such. And there is one more thing. We are going to see an error related to the time, because as we are using the server timestamp over here within the link card component, we are kind of trying to pass in the same thing to the format function. So it's not actually the timestamp that can work locally, and we have to parse it in order to use it. So there are actually two ways we can kind of do that over here. In order to parse it, we just need to call the toDate method. Now this thing is something specific to Firebase, specific to the server timestamp to be more precise. So if we do this, now it's going to work perfectly fine, as you can see. But I think instead of calling this method right over here, we can do it while pushing the link to the array. So if we add the created at, which in this case is going to be okay, so we have like this thing will return back the entire object, and we need to override the created at property by calling the toDate right over here. So for that, I think we kind of need to call the same method one more time and access the created at, which is in this case the server timestamp, and we need to call the toDate right over here. Let me just check if we remove that. Okay, we did. So now if we save it, it's going to parse the date right over here, and we are updating the state using the same thing, and now it should work perfectly fine. That's great. So I think that's it. Let's try creating one more link, and let me just fix this thing real quick. This is actually a bug in version 4 of Material UI that we are using this library. And in order to fix this, there are two ways. One is to get to the index.js, the main root of our application, this thing. One is to remove the strict mode in such a way, and it's going to fix in the issue. If we refresh and if we take a look, as you can see, it has been fixed. The other way, because we do need to keep the strict mode the way that it is, the other way is to get to the theme of our application, the theme file, and instead of importing the create MUI theme, we can import the unstable version of it, the method which does the same thing, but it is like it avoids that error message. And it's something like this: unstable underscore create MUI strict mode theme, and we can rename it as the same thing just so that we have the same naming. So now if we save it, it's going to fix in the issue. As you can see, we can open the Moodle and we are getting no errors. Now that being said, let's try creating one more link. And there we have the document being added to the database, to our collection. But as you can see, we are not really updating it locally. So in order to do that, what we can do is, when the user creates the document, like there are two ways. The simplest way would be to kind of refetch the entire thing, but that's going to be a bit costly because we will be making read request again for that thing. So instead of that thing, instead of refetching the documents, we can kind of update it locally, because everything that we need for a link, we do have it over here. So let's do that.